The millionaire ordered his prized bull to the arena, but what happened next left him weeping. What happens next will leave you speechless. The gates of the Devereaux Arena groaned open with a sound that seemed to drag across every ear in the crowd. Dust lifted from the packed dirt floor, swirling beneath the torchlight as the heavy iron bars clanked against the stone walls. A hush fell over the thousands of men gathered in the stands. They leaned forward, their breath caught in anticipation, their voices held back by the weight of fear that swept through the air like a storm. At the very center of it all stood Lionel Darrington, his cane tapping once against the earth. The sharp click echoed unnaturally in the silence, as though even the ground responded to him. He wore a long dark coat trimmed with gold, the fabric heavy with wealth and pride. His gray eyes scanned the crowd, feeding off their attention. A smirk curved across his lips, the kind of smile that revealed not joy but possession. To Lionel, the arena was his kingdom, the men in the stands his subjects, and the beast about to emerge from the shadows his weapon. The creaking gates gave way to a snort so deep it seemed to come from the earth itself. Goliath stepped forward. His massive frame filled the opening, shoulders rippling with muscle, horns glinting like sharpened blades beneath the torchlight. The bull's eyes burned dark and unyielding, and when his hooves struck the dirt, the ground seemed to tremble. Even the most hardened men in the stands flinched, some whispering hurried prayers, others gripping the wooden railings until their knuckles whitened. Lionel spread his arms, soaking in their fear as though it were applause. "Behold!" he cried, his voice rising above the tension. "The beast no man dares to face, the terror of the fields. Tonight Greyvale shall remember who commands the earth beneath its feet." His voice was sharp, cutting, and every word fell with the weight of command. But even as the men roared in reply, their cheers laced with unease, one figure remained still. Near the edge of the stands, half shadowed by the flickering torchlight, sat Elias Rowan. His jacket was frayed at the edges, his boots scuffed with miles of walking, his face calm in a way that seemed misplaced among the feverish crowd. His eyes, steady and unreadable, followed the bull's movements with a quiet focus that no one else noticed. To the men around him, he was just another drifter drawn to the spectacle. But Elias's silence, his unmoving posture, spoke of something deeper, something waiting. Lionel's gaze swept across the stands as if searching for a victim. His smirk widened when his eyes caught Elias. He lifted his cane and pointed directly at him. "You there," Lionel said, his tone mocking yet sharp as a blade. "You sit as though this is no more than a harvest game. Do you doubt the power of Goliath?" The crowd stirred, whispers darting like sparks across dry leaves. Elias did not flinch. His jaw tightened, but he remained seated, his hand resting on his knee. "I asked you a question," Lionel pressed, his voice louder now, reaching every corner of the arena. "Do you doubt the beast?" Elias rose slowly, his movements measured, deliberate. His eyes met Lionel's without hesitation, and for a moment the noise of the arena faded into silence. "I doubt the man who hides behind the beast," Elias replied, his voice low yet steady, carrying across the hushed crowd. The air shifted. Murmurs grew into startled gasps, some men shaking their heads, others daring to smirk at Lionel's expense. But Lionel's smile did not break. Instead, it twisted into something crueler. "You have spirit," Lionel said, his voice dripping with amusement. "Let us see if your spirit holds when you stand before him." He tapped his cane against the ground once more. "Into the ring." Elias's brow furrowed. "I came to watch, not to perform," he said calmly. His voice carried no fear, but there was a weight in it, a quiet refusal. Lionel leaned forward, eyes narrowing, his smirk sharpening like a knife. "Then watch as a coward, unless you prove otherwise. Do you wish the whole of Greyvale to see your spine bend under the weight of fear? Or will you stand as a man before Goliath?" The crowd, hungry for more, began to shout. "In the ring!" some cried. "Prove yourself!" others jeered. The sound rose like thunder, pressing against Elias's ears, urging him toward the dirt below. He could feel their eyes digging into him, not with concern, but with the cruel curiosity of men who wanted to see another body broken for their entertainment. Elias's chest tightened, not with terror of the bull, but with the weight of what he knew was inevitable. Lionel's words were not an invitation. They were a trap. To refuse would be to surrender his dignity before the crowd, to yield himself to the label of coward. To accept meant stepping into the ring with death itself. Yet behind the noise, behind Lionel's arrogance, something else stirred within Elias. An old shadow, a memory tied to the very beast now pawing the earth with rage. He drew in a breath, steady and deep, and his eyes flicked once toward Goliath. The bull's nostrils flared, his body tense, but in his gaze Elias saw something different from the others. A recognition, faint and flickering, like the ember of a fire long thought dead. Elias clenched his jaw. The crowd roared louder, pressing him toward a choice. Lionel lifted his cane high, triumph already etched in his sneer. "Enter," he demanded, "or forever live in shame." Elias's steps were slow as he moved down the narrow aisle, each one followed by the crowd's rising cries. His boots struck the wooden planks, his heart heavy but his face calm. He did not glance at the men leaning over the rails, shouting, laughing, or whispering prayers. His eyes remained fixed on the arena below, where torchlight glared off the dust, and Goliath's massive form waited like a shadow of judgment. The final gate swung open, and Elias stepped onto the dirt floor. The smell of dust and sweat filled his lungs, the air thick with heat. His hands hung loosely at his sides, though his fists were tight with quiet resolve. Goliath snorted, pawing the earth, his horns catching the light in sharp arcs. Lionel watched from above, leaning on his cane, his eyes glittering with cruel satisfaction. The crowd hushed once more, waiting, the silence stretched taut like a rope ready to snap. Elias's chest rose and fell, steady, his gaze locked not on Lionel but on the beast before him. He knew what was coming, and he knew there was no turning back. The trap had been set, and the choice had been taken from him. Lionel's arrogance had forced his hand. Elias's chest tightened, not with fear of the bull, but with the knowledge that Lionel's arrogance had set a trap he could not walk away from. The dirt crunched beneath Elias's boots as he stepped forward, the arena wrapped in a suffocating silence. Torches flickered along the high stone walls, their flames casting restless shadows that seemed to tremble with the crowd's breath. All eyes fixed on him, the drifter with no weapon, no armor, no claim of bravery. The whispers that followed him were like ghosts circling, heavy with disbelief, pity, and cruel amusement. Goliath stood opposite, his hulking frame filling the center of the ring. His nostrils flared with each breath, sending streams of steam curling into the night air. His hide was scarred from countless battles, his horns sharp and glistening like polished steel. He stamped the ground, each strike echoing like a drumbeat that rolled into the chests of every man watching. His muscles coiled and rippled under the torchlight, a storm waiting to be unleashed. Elias drew a slow breath, his chest rising and falling evenly, though the weight of memory pressed against his ribs like a stone. The crowd thought him doomed, but he knew better. He knew this beast. He had known him years ago, in another ring, in another night that had shattered his world. His younger brother's face flickered across his mind, pale with terror, forced into the dirt by the cruel laughter of Lionel's guards. The sound of hooves, the scream that had been cut short, the blood that had darkened the sand, it all returned with brutal clarity. And there, at the center of that nightmare, had been Goliath. The bull lowered his head, snorted, and pawed at the ground. Then, with a surge of power, he charged. The crowd erupted into cries. Some shouted for Elias to run, others mocked his stillness, eager to see him tossed into the air and broken against the earth. Dust exploded beneath Goliath's hooves as he thundered forward, a wall of muscle and fury. But Elias did not run. He waited, calm as stone, his eyes locked on the bull. At the last instant, his body shifted with precision. He sidestepped, the air burning against his sleeve as Goliath's horn grazed it, tearing the fabric but sparing his flesh. The bull stormed past, skidding against the dirt, swinging his massive head in frustration. The audience gasped, their disbelief sharp as a cut through the silence that followed. Elias did not retreat. Instead, he turned with measured calm, his hand reaching out, steady as if moved by memory rather than fear. He placed it against the bull's thick neck, his palm pressed into the warmth of the beast's hide, the tremor of its rage vibrating beneath his skin. The bull stilled. For a heartbeat, the entire arena froze. Then came the cries. "Impossible!" men shouted. Others muttered in awe, clutching the rails of the stands as though afraid the sight might vanish if they blinked. Their jeers twisted into stunned silence, disbelief etched across their faces. Lionel's smirk faltered. From his high seat above the ring he leaned forward, his cane gripping tight in his hand. His sharp eyes narrowed, flicking between Elias and Goliath. He had expected screams, blood, broken bones. He had expected to break the drifter in front of everyone. Instead, he saw control where there should have been chaos. Elias kept his hand against Goliath's neck, speaking softly, words too quiet for the crowd to hear, but firm enough for the bull to feel. His voice carried not fear but command, born not from dominance but from understanding. His fingers pressed into the thick fur, and slowly, Goliath's rage eased, his massive chest rising and falling more evenly. A man in the stands whispered, "He tamed him." Another shook his head, disbelief in his eyes. "No man tames Goliath, not without trickery." But it wasn't trickery. Elias had spent years in silence, wandering from town to town, working the fields, learning the ways of animals larger than himself. He had studied their patterns, their fears, their moments of weakness. He had taught himself to face strength not with brute force but with calm. And now, all of that silence, all of that hidden training, rose to meet this moment. Goliath snorted again, his massive head lowering slightly, his eyes glinting not with blind rage but with recognition. Elias knew it was there. He had seen it the night his brother died. The bull had been wild, yes, but it had been driven into that madness by the cruelty of men who prodded it, starved it, and chained it for sport. Elias's brother had been a casualty not of the beast, but of the greed of Lionel. The crowd could not understand this truth, but Elias felt it with every fiber of his being. This was not a fight for him, it was a reckoning. Lionel's voice sliced through the air, sharp and commanding. "Fight him!" he barked, slamming his cane against the railing. His eyes blazed with fury, his face red with humiliation. "Do not stand there like some—" He stopped himself, his words trembling with rage. "Strike him down!" But Elias did not move to strike. He remained firm, his hand never leaving the bull's neck, his voice steady as he whispered again. The audience shifted, unease growing among them. They had come for blood, for spectacle. Instead, they were witnessing something strange, something that unsettled their expectations. Their cheers faltered, and the weight of silence returned, thicker now, as though the very arena held its breath. Lionel's smirk, once so confident, cracked. His knuckles whitened against his cane. He had wanted Elias to crumble, to fall before the beast, to prove to the town that wealth and power ruled over all. Instead, the drifter was standing in the ring, alive, unbroken, and, unthinkably, holding the attention of the deadliest bull alive. The air trembled with tension as Goliath lowered his massive head, his dark eyes fixed on Elias. Dust clung to the bull's hide, glistening in the torchlight, but his fury had dimmed into something the crowd could not understand. Elias crouched low, steadying his breathing, his hand pressed against the beast's head, his voice low and calm. The arena, built for carnage, was silent. It was no longer a fight of muscle or blood, but of patience, control, and willpower. Above, Lionel's voice cut through the silence like a whip. "Attack! Do you hear me? Attack!" he bellowed, slamming his cane against the railing. His face was red, his jaw clenched in fury. He had built this night to remind Greyvale of his dominance, but the sight unfolding below was unraveling him. Goliath did not move. He breathed heavily, the sound rolling like thunder across the arena, but his head dipped lower, his massive body bowing ever so slightly beneath Elias's hand. The crowd gasped. Some men stood to their feet, their mouths open in disbelief. A ripple of whispers surged through the stands. "He's bowing," one man stammered, his voice cracking. "No," another muttered, shaking his head. "That bull bows to no one." But the evidence was clear. The beast that had gored and trampled countless challengers was yielding, not to whips or spears, but to the steady hand of a man no one had thought worthy of stepping into the ring. Lionel's smirk vanished completely. His hand tightened around the silver handle of his cane until his knuckles blanched. "No!" he hissed, though his voice trembled. Then louder, desperate, he roared, "This is trickery! Do not let them be fooled!" Yet the crowd was no longer his. Murmurs of Elias's name spread through the arena. Some men whispered it in awe, while others began to chant, their voices hesitant at first but growing stronger. "Elias! Elias!" The sound rose, washing over the stands like a tide. Lionel's fury boiled over. He turned to his guards, his voice sharp and venomous. "Get in there! Drive that beast wild! I want him raging, do you hear me? Now!" The guards, clad in leather and carrying long spears tipped with iron, hesitated for only a moment. Then, under Lionel's glare, they vaulted into the arena, their boots kicking up dust as they charged toward the bull. The crowd's chants faltered, replaced with a chorus of confused cries. Elias's eyes flicked toward them, his body tensing. He stepped further in front of Goliath, his stance firm, his voice low as he whispered to the bull. "Stay. Trust me." His tone was steady, though his pulse pounded in his ears. The first spear struck. Elias moved without thought, his body sliding between man and beast. The iron tip slashed across his arm, tearing through flesh. Pain seared up his side, but he did not falter. He clenched his jaw, his teeth grinding against the white-hot sting, and planted his feet. Blood trickled down his sleeve, darkening the fabric. The crowd erupted, their voices shattering into chaos. Gasps, shouts, and cries of outrage filled the arena. Lionel leaned forward, his eyes wide. For the first time, fear flickered behind his anger. He had expected the bull to gore Elias, not for the man to throw himself between spear and beast. Elias gripped his wounded arm tightly, but did not retreat. His other hand stayed on Goliath, steady, commanding. The bull's muscles tensed, a low rumble building in his chest. His great head swung toward the guards, his breath flaring hot as smoke. Then the roar came. Goliath charged with terrifying speed, his hooves pounding the dirt like war drums. He crashed into the guards, his horns slashing through the air with lethal force. One guard was thrown back against the arena wall, his spear clattering uselessly to the ground. Another scrambled away, barely dodging the sweep of Goliath's horns. Panic spread among them, their formation broken in an instant. The crowd exploded into cheers and screams. Some shouted in fear for the guards, others roared in support of Elias. The chants of his name returned, louder this time, swelling until it seemed the very stones of the arena vibrated with it. Elias staggered, clutching his bleeding arm, but his eyes stayed locked on Goliath. "Easy," he shouted, his voice rising over the chaos. His tone carried strength, urgency, and command. "That's enough." Miraculously, the bull slowed. His chest heaved, his nostrils flared, but his frenzy eased as Elias stepped in front of him again, hand outstretched, palm steady. The beast lowered his head once more, pressing into Elias's touch like a soldier awaiting orders. Every man in the arena saw it then. Elias was not merely surviving. He was leading. Lionel's lips parted, his breath shallow. His cane trembled in his grip. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. His voice cracked, a tremor betraying the storm inside him. This is not how it ends. But it was ending, and not in the way he had planned. The audience no longer looked to him for command. Their eyes, their loyalty, their awe, everything was slipping away, carried by the sight of a man who had risked his life not to conquer a beast, but to protect it. One of the guards, battered and limping, dragged himself from the dirt and fled the arena. The others followed, stumbling, their spears abandoned. None dared face the bull again. The arena was chaos, but in the center stood Elias, calm, bloodied, unyielding. He steadied the beast with nothing but presence and will, his calmness a shield stronger than any weapon. The chants of his name filled the night, echoing through the stands, shaking the walls. The spectacle Lionel had built with arrogance and cruelty was collapsing around him. His control, his pride, his power, all of it was slipping, piece by piece, before the eyes of his own people. The payoff was undeniable. The man they mocked had not only survived, but had turned the very symbol of fear into a creature of trust. Lionel, now trembling, could do nothing but watch as his carefully built spectacle crumbled before him. The arena lay in silence. The dust that had been stirred by hooves and footsteps now drifted lazily through the fading sunlight, catching on the edges of broken wood and torn banners. Where moments before men had roared and cheered, there was only a hollow quiet, broken by the occasional creak of the stands settling after the crowd's departure. Lionel sat alone in the shadow of his private balcony, his shoulders slumped, his face wet with tears he could not control. His hands, once adorned with rings and jewels that glinted under the lights of Greyvale's grand arena, now trembled as though stripped of all power. The laughter he had once commanded, the respect he had once demanded, all of it had turned against him. He had built the spectacle to crown himself as master, to prove that even nature itself bent before his wealth. Yet he had watched, powerless, as Elias stood where he could not, taming the very beast Lionel believed he owned. And when Goliath, the symbol of his empire, turned his back on him, Lionel felt the foundation of his world collapse. The town did not wait long to spread word of what had happened. By the next morning, whispers carried through every tavern, every market stall, every workshop in Greyvale. Men spoke of Lionel's collapse with a mixture of disbelief and satisfaction, their words sharp and unrelenting. "He wept," one man muttered over a pint of ale, shaking his head in mock pity. "Wept like a child while another stood tall," another answered, slamming his mug on the table. "And Elias," a younger villager added, leaning closer, his voice hushed with awe. "He never struck the beast, never sought to hurt it. He stood calm, and the bull bowed. That's what men will remember." Lionel heard these whispers, though none were spoken to his face. Servants who once hurried to meet his every demand now kept their distance, their eyes downcast, their silence filled with judgment. He tried to summon them with the booming voice that had once commanded obedience, but the strength was gone. His words echoed in empty halls, unheeded. Days turned to weeks, and Lionel shut himself away. His mansion, once the centerpiece of the town, became a place of shadows. Curtains were drawn tight against the sun, and the once lavish rooms grew stale with neglect. Dust settled on the marble floors, and the grand chandelier that had been polished daily now hung dim and lifeless. At night, he would sit by the window, staring at the arena. Its gates were locked, the stands abandoned, the silence of it mocking him. He would trace the outline of the place with his eyes, remembering the roar of the crowd, the crack of whips, the thunder of hooves. But always, his memory returned to that final image, the sight of Goliath turning away from him, walking freely into the open air, while the crowd's eyes followed not him, but Elias. Elias, meanwhile, lay recovering in the home of the townsman. His wounds were many, but the people of Greyvale tended to him with a reverence that humbled him deeply. Men brought bread and broth, some offering quiet words of thanks, others simply placing gifts at the door and leaving without a word. One evening, as Elias sat propped up in bed, a carpenter named Jonah came to visit. His face was weathered from years of work, and his hands bore the calluses of his trade. He placed a wooden carving of a bull on the bedside table, its form strong yet gentle. "It isn't much," Jonah said softly, shifting uncomfortably as though ashamed of the simplicity of his gift. "But I thought it right. What you did, it showed us all that strength is not in the lash or the chain. You stood there, unbroken, when all of us would have faltered." Elias looked at the carving for a long moment before speaking, his voice quiet but steady. "I did not seek to prove anything. I only did what I felt was right. If the beast was to be free, he had to be seen as more than a weapon." Jonah nodded, his throat tightening with emotion. "Perhaps, but still, you've given us more than you know. You've shown us that men like Lionel cannot buy what matters most." Word of Elias's courage spread beyond Greyvale. Travelers carried the tale across towns and villages, and soon Elias's name was spoken with respect in places he had never seen. To many, he became a symbol, not of rebellion, but of resilience, a reminder that dignity could not be bought or stolen, and that even the forgotten could rise to stand against cruelty. And Goliath? The bull was released into the wild. Men said they saw him roaming the hills beyond Greyvale, his massive form cutting a striking figure against the horizon. Some swore that on certain evenings, when the wind carried the scent of smoke from the town, the beast could be seen standing still, watching from a distance, as though guarding the people from afar. Children spoke of him with wonder, and even the elders lowered their voices when his name was mentioned, for it seemed to them that Goliath was no mere beast, but a living spirit of strength and freedom. For Lionel, fate dealt its final hand with cruel precision. His empire collapsed in silence. The men who had once stood by his side abandoned him, unwilling to be tied to the weight of his disgrace. Lawsuits drained his coffers. Debts he had once hidden beneath wealth rose to the surface, and soon his fortune crumbled like dust in the wind. He tried to rally his power, to summon his old authority, but the town no longer feared him. Merchants refused his credit. Landowners who had once bowed to him now turned him away at their doors. The magistrates, who had always looked the other way, no longer offered their protection. And so Lionel sat in his mansion, a prisoner of his own pride. Each day he took his seat at the window, staring at the silent arena that once echoed with his triumphs. The cheers he longed for were gone, replaced by memories that cut deeper than any wound. He was haunted not by the loss of wealth, but by the truth that had been revealed to all, that he had never been master of the beast, nor of the town, nor even of himself. In those final days, men who passed by the mansion spoke of seeing Lionel's pale face in the window, his eyes fixed on the arena as though waiting for the past to return. But it never did. What returned instead was silence, and the memory of his greatest failure. And so it was that the millionaire who once believed he could command fear was instead left weeping, undone by the very beast he thought would secure his legacy. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores powerful themes of pride, loss, and the profound emotional bonds that can exist between humans and animals. This narrative aims to highlight that some things are worth more than any price, and to inspire empathy for the unspoken struggles that connect us all.